Okay, everyone, so today's lesson we are going to focus on finding the radius of cones, spheres, and cylinders. Yesterday you practiced finding the height. And remember, Mr. Katay went over those simple directions whenever you find the height. Remember the first thing he did, he told you to multiply your known numbers together. So that was step one. He said to multiply your known numbers. And once you were done doing that, the only other step you had to do was divide the volume by this product. So remember, this step right here was whenever you were finding the height. When you're finding the radius, the steps are very, very, very similar. You are still going to multiply your known numbers. You are then going to divide the volume by that product. And then there's only one more additional step. Your last step always, which I will put in green since this is dealing with finding the radius, would be you are either going to take the cube root, which looks like that, or the square root, depending on what value we're looking for. If the radius was squared, then obviously we are going to take the square root. If the radius was cubed, then obviously we are going to take the cubed root. So we're going to practice a little bit, but before I do that, I wanted to show you the calculator that you all are used to seeing. Just to show you a few things, remember the square root button you have to hit, so I'll put it in green. To find the square root button you have to hit second and then the x squared key, because above that, even though I circled it, it's the square root key. To find the cubed root, in order to do the cubed root, I'm going to erase this. In order to do the cubed root, first you have to press the number 3 because we're dealing with the cubed root. Then you hit second and then the caret key, because right above the caret key, which it's hard to see in this picture, is you can do the root of any value. So since we were doing the cubed root, that's why you have to press 3, then second, and then this value. If you are unaware of how to do any of that, please ask your teacher at that time. If you are good to go, then let's move on and try to work out some problems. So I'm going to fast forward to where we are at in our packet, which deals with finding the radius. So the first problem involves finding the radius of a sphere. What we're going to do is first write down our formula. So remember, the volume of a sphere is V equals 4/3 pi times your radius to the third power. So the first thing you're going to want to do is plug in all of your known values. So in this case, we know what our volume is. So I'm going to write 904.32 equals 4/3 pi r cubed. Now, just like Mr. Katay said, you're going to multiply your known values together. So the left-hand side, we can't multiply anything together, so I'm going to leave it 904.32. In my calculator, if I take 4/3 times pi, I will get roughly 4.2, and I'm still left with my radius to the third power. So your next step is to divide, because we want to get r by itself. We want to isolate that variable. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4.2. Those cancel, and I am left with roughly 215.3 equals r cubed. Your goal is to just find the radius, not the radius to the third power. So this is when we need to do the opposite of cubing. The opposite of cubing is to take the cubed root. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the cubed root of both sides. When I do that, that will cancel over here. And the cubed root of 215.3, in your calculator, you're going to see it's roughly 5.999 and so forth is equal to your radius. Anytime you're given a value like that, I always round to the nearest whole number. So in this case, my radius would be 6. So just let me reiterate this a bit to you all. Remember, the first thing I did was plug in my known values. So I plugged in my volume. I then multiplied any values I could together. I divided by 4.2 to isolate my variable r. And then I didn't want to have r to the third power. I need r, the radius, just to be by itself. So since it's to the third power, I took the cube root of that, and I had roughly 6. Shape, we are dealing with a cylinder. So our formula for a volume of the cylinder is V equals pi r squared h. Once again, I'm going to plug all of my known values in. So for my volume, I'm going to plug in 602.88 equals pi times my radius squared, and my height this time is right here, it's 12. Just like in the last video with Mr. Kate, we're going to combine our known values by multiplying. So on the left-hand side, I have 602.88 equals 12 times pi is roughly 37.7 r squared. Your goal is to get r by itself, so you have to divide both sides by 37.7. because you are trying to isolate the variable by doing the opposite or inverse operation. So those cancel, and I have roughly 15.99 is equal to r squared. Well, remember, our goal is to get r, or the radius, by itself. So instead of squaring a value, the opposite of squaring a value is to take the square root. So if I take the square root of 15.99, roughly in my calculator, I will get 4. So 4 is my radius. Okay, our next problem, we are finding the radius of a cone. So remember, the formula for a cone is V equals 1/3 pi times your radius squared times your height. So as always, I'm going to plug everything in. So my volume is given here. It says 144 pi. And now I'm going to plug in the rest of my information. 1/3 times pi times my radius squared, and it tells me here my height is 12. So just like Mr. Kate's video, you're going to simplify the left side, simplify the right side by multiplying. 144 times pi is roughly 452.4. 1/3 times pi times 12 will roughly give you 12.6, and we're left with r squared. Remember, the opposite of multiplying, we are dividing both sides by 12.6. We would be left with roughly 36 is equal to r squared, roughly. So remember, the opposite of squaring a value, you must take the square root, and the square root of 36 is 6. So 6 is my radius. So for our next problem, we're dealing with finding the radius of a cylinder. So first I'm going to write down the formula for volume of a cylinder. V equals pi times your radius squared times your height. Next, we're going to plug in all of our known values. So my volume, it says it right here, is 226 is equal to pi times my radius squared times my height, in this case, was 6. So I'm going to multiply what I can on my right-hand side to simplify, which would only be the 6 and the pi. So therefore, I would have 226 is equal to 18.8 r squared. The opposite of multiplying is dividing by 18.8. Those would cancel out, and roughly we would have 12 is equal to r squared. Well, remember, you can never have r squared. You want it just to be r. So the opposite of squaring is to take the square root, and the square root of 12 is roughly 3.5. So 3.5 centimeters is my radius. Our next problem deals with volume of a sphere that I'm finding the radius. So I would have the formula V equals 4/3 pi r cubed. Let's start to plug in our known values. So 334 is my volume. is equal to 4/3 pi times my radius cubed. Well, if I simplify the right-hand side by multiplying, I would have 334 is equal to 4/3 pi is roughly 4.2, and I still have r to the third power. Remember, I have to get r by itself. The opposite of multiplying is dividing, so I'm going to divide both sides by 4.2. Since I'm running out of room, I'm going to continue the problem up here. So my 4.2's would cancel, and I would have roughly 79.5 is equal to r cubed. However, that doesn't look very good. Hold on, let me fix that 3. So remember, the opposite of cubing is to take the cubed root. So the cubed root is what I have to do both sides. So the cubed root of 79.5 is roughly 4.3 is my radius. Remember, to get that cubed root key, if you forgot, you can either fast forward or rewind to the beginning of the video, or remember on your calculator you have to press. So remember, you press the number 3 and then you hit the second button, then that caret key button, and then in this case it would be your 79.5, and that would give you roughly 4.3 as your radius. Alright folks, so for the next few problems I would like you to try to do this one, the next one, and the next one. The next 3 problems I would like you to try on your own. You're going to pause the video, and whenever you're ready to check it, press play, please. Okay, so to go over these few problems you had to do, for this one we were dealing with a cylinder, so I wrote the cylinder formula. 200 pi was my volume, and 8 was my height. So I multiplied 200 times pi to simplify the left-hand side. I multiplied pi times 8 to give me roughly 25.1. Remember, your goal is to isolate r to get that by itself. So I divided both sides by 25.1. I do not want to leave my answer r squared. I just want to find the radius. So the opposite of squaring a value is to take the square root. So in this case, the square root of 25 is 5. Next problem. I was dealing with a marble, so that is the shape of a sphere. So I used the formula for a sphere. I plugged in the volume, which was 288 pi. I simplified 4/3 times pi, which was roughly 4.2. And I also simplified 288 times pi, which is roughly 904.8. I then isolated r, so the opposite of multiplying is dividing, so I divided both sides by 4.2, and I had roughly 215.4. r cubed, but remember, your final step is to either take the cubed root or the square root. Since it was r cubed, I took the cubed root, and the cube root is roughly 5.99, which is roughly 6 for your radius. But I was not done with that question yet. It gave me my radius, so then to find the diameter, remember you multiply your radius times 2, or just double it. So my diameter was 12. Lastly, to find the radius of a cylinder, I plugged in my cylinder formula, I plugged in my volume and my height, and then I multiplied pi times my height to simplify that side, which gave me roughly 31.4. I then divided both sides by 31.4, and I was left with 30.3 equals r squared. I took the square root, and I was roughly had 5.5 equals r. Okay, here's just a little recap. So your first step is always to write down the correct formula. So that's step 1. Step 2 would be to plug in the volume and the height if needed. Of course, the height isn't needed in the sphere formula, but it is in the cylinder or cone. The next thing is simplify the left side and the right side by multiplying if needed. So remember, you're going to multiply to make sure that there's only one value on the left side and one value on your right side. Then you will divide to get the radius by itself, always. And your final step is to take the cube root if you're dealing with a sphere, or square root if dealing with a cylinder or cone. So I hope this video helped you. Make sure to ask your teacher if you have questions, and there's a Schoology quiz you can all log into and take. Thank you so much, and as always, ask questions and have a wonderful day.